Hello, everybody. Today is day 146, reading from several passages from the book of Psalms. Psalms 139 addresses the omniscience of God. This is referencing God as all-knowing. God searches and God knows is what the psalmist says here. He says, God knows, you know when I sit and you know when I rise up. You know my thoughts afar off. You know about my paths. You're acquainted with all of my ways. You know my words even before I speak. This is referencing that God, who is aware of the motives of the heart, not just our actions, but he is mindful even of those things that we ponder. And this can only be characteristic of that which is shared by divinity. God is God and he is all-knowing. And then this word you'll find in this passage from Psalms 139 is the word hedge. It's we often hear this prayed, God, would you place a hedge of protection around this person? And maybe you've wondered where that has come from. Well, you'll find it here. You hedge me behind and before, you laid your hand upon me. And so there's this aspect of which we pray this protective care over people. Oh, we can pray for ourselves, but it is indeed the power of the tongue for you and I to be able to declare the protective care of God over individuals. And then the question, where can I go from you? This is what the psalmist is asking. How can I escape you? God, is there any place that I can go where you are not? Is there some place we can go to flee from your presence? And the answer is obvious. This is what we call the omnipresence of God, that God is everywhere present. Some have referred to it as, first of all, the essential presence, and that is that God is in every place. In fact, the psalmist says, if I were to ascend to the mountain, you are there. If I make my bed in hell, you are there. There is no place that one can go to escape the presence of God. Now, that presence, though, can be fostered, and there is not just the essential presence of God, but there's also the manifest presence of God. This is what Moses experienced, where God manifested his glory to such an extent that the Shekinah of his presence overtook him. That's the manifest. There's times unexplainably that God's presence will show up. We've experienced this at church or in our home when we're talking or praying, or out when we're taking a walk and we see the beauty of creation, and all of a sudden we have a visitation of the manifest presence of God. And then there's also what we would refer to as the cultivated presence of God, where you and I are able to, you draw near to me, God says, and I'll draw near to you. And we read some of that God is near to us, and as we reach out to him, he responds back to us. But God is omnipresence. He's everywhere. There's no place you can go that he is not. Then God raises a clear message about our design, who and where we come from, and the difference between man and animal. Do you remember this, that you and I are created in the image of God? That is not true of animal. God breathed in the man the breath of life. He became a living soul. Here comes the reason that abortion is a violation of God's righteous standard, because we're interrupting life and the design of God and that which is created in the image of God. And why is abortion evil? Because we've read about it today in Psalms 139:13. For you formed my inward parts. You created me in my mother's womb. You referring to God. God created you in your mother's womb. And then the psalmist says, I am fearfully and I'm wonderfully made. In fact, he says, my frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret. The psalmist goes on and says, your eyes saw my substance being yet unformed. And then he makes a reference here, in your book, they were all written. The days fashioned for me, when as yet there were none of them. You see, you're not an accident, and God has created each and every one of us. And before we took form, God knew about us. And for us to interrupt that very life, it's more than tissue. We're talking about one created in the image of God. And it is sin for that life to be interrupted. And nobody has a right to take that life but God himself. This should build such inner confidence of an all-seeing God, an all-knowing God. And think of it, my days are numbered. He initiated my existence. I have purpose. and I'm not an accident. And when we begin to look at life from that framework, then we are keenly aware that this omniscient God who is all-knowing is aware of my being. I'm not an accident. And this omnipresent God who's ever present is a God who's with me even now as he was with me before I was even born. This empowers me to live life with confidence and with certainty. And I just want to say today, I'm so grateful that you and I have been created by God, for God, and what we do with our life is a gift that we give back to him.